Hello and welcome. Just by chance I stumbled across Jonas' video on the 8080 and what should I say, I was literally sold, because being a kid of the 80s and trancing a lot in the 90s, this was exactly the sound bringing back so many memories. Luckily I found a device in really good condition on the second-hand market for an acceptable price. In contrast to Jonas, I would like to avoid a DAW but create a Dawless environment for the 8080. So it was the aim to set up the 8080 in a bichambral setup to be controlled by the Octatrack and using all the advanced features on the Octatrack such as MIDI-ARP, MIDI CC and so on. Main motivation was to create a kind of quick start tutorial on MIDI, because if you are new to the 8080 you won't find much on the internet with respect to current setups. The unit itself is pretty old and was only produced for 3 years, and also many threads on the internet are 10 years or even older. A short disclaimer: this is not an 8080 tutorial and not an Octatrack tutorial. Here the main focus is clearly on connecting both units and getting the most of them together. Why using an Octatrack? So if you have a look at the manual itself, you see that the 8080s offers features such as motion control and also sequencing functionalities. But at second glance you will recognize that editing and programming those steps looks really painful. Here the Octatrack offers far more advanced features and is much more straightforward, at least in my opinion. Let's have a look at the MIDI connections. I'm using the MIDI in on the 8080 and the MIDI out on the Octatrack. While doing so I lose some features such as RPS and the arpeggiator on the 8080, but in this case I don't mind because I think the ARP functionalities on the Octatrack are much more superior compared to the 8080. Let's have a look how to set up the 8080. The procedure is described on page number 62 in the manual. In order to use the 8080 in a bitimbral setup, you have to ensure that key mode is set to dual. First step that needs to be done is to define the MIDI channels for upper and lower panel. To do so, press Edit and go to Parts. Now press Parts as long as you get to the corresponding menu here, and you can choose increase or decrease to change your values. In this example we assign MIDI channel 1 to the upper and MIDI channel 2 to the lower panel. In the next step the MIDI settings has to be changed. Go to Edit, press MIDI and go to this menu, TX/RX Program Change Switch. Here it's important to go to this submenu here, Bank Selection and Program Changes, that has to be defined. Press MIDI again until you are in this menu, MIDI Synchronization. Here please ensure that you are on MIDI in. This means that the 8080 receives the external clock from the Octatrack. Another important aspect is the performance control channel. I left this functionality here on off. While leaving it on, I observed really strange jumps in the key mode and also bank and program changes. This disappeared while setting this switch to off. To be honest, no idea why, but please let me know in the comments if you observe something similar. Now let's define the Octatrack settings. First go to Global, go to MIDI settings and ensure that transport send is activated, clock send is activated, but also program changes are sended. Now enter the MIDI sequencer on the Octatrack. By double pressing source, make sure that track 1 is assigned to MIDI channel 1 and track 2 is assigned to MIDI channel number 2. Now let's go to FX page number 2 and let's define the first MIDI CC settings. Encoder number 9 is set to 71, which corresponds to the filter resonance, whereas encoder number 10 is set to 74, which corresponds to the filter cutoff frequency. I use the same MIDI settings for MIDI channel number 2. I programmed a short sequence on the Octatrack, and what you can now hear is the upper patch. If you now switch to MIDI CC, you can use encoder number 9 and number 10 in order to change cutoff frequency and the resonance. Now let's change to MIDI channel number 2, and also here you have the option to go to the MIDI CC page and to change your filter resonance and cutoff as well. What's really great and what I haven't expected is that it's possible to control both values, so resonance and filter cutoff frequency, for both channels individually. Another important aspect are program and bank changes. To be honest, here I had a really hard time to figure that out, and probably I wouldn't have managed that without the help of Peter Haynes from elektronauts.com. Now let's go to track number 1 and let's listen to the upper manual. The glue pad, that's exactly the sound we heard before. By pressing source, you not only have the option to change your MIDI channel, but moreover you can have a look at program. This defines program changes, and by cycling through different numbers here and pressing yes, you can change the sound within the specific bank you are currently in. Please note that currently we are on preset bank number 1. This is defined by the bank program of 81 and the sub bank of 0. Now let's go to bank 81 and sub bank number 1. By doing so, you are able to switch to preset bank number 2. 81 bank 2 corresponds to preset number 3. If you want to go to the user bank, go to 80. It's important to know that MIDI settings are stored per part on the Octatrack. This means if you want to switch or mix and match sounds between different banks, you have to switch to different parts. I hope this tutorial was useful for you, so please feel free to like, subscribe and to comment. Thanks for watching and see you next time.